Welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course. Let's learn how to play CATAN, the City and Knights expansion. Now, unlike the Seafarers expansion, this does not include small changes to the rules with multiple scenarios. Instead, this is a holistic change to the base rules of CATAN and is meant to be played like normal CATAN, but with all of these rules layered on top of it. Because of this, I'll assume you already know the base rules of CATAN. Without further ado, let's look at the changes to setup, as everything is the same except for these changes. We'll first remove the 1 to 2 piece of the CATAN frame and replace it with the 1 to 2 piece that includes the Barbarian track from the expansion. Place this piece of the frame, the development cards, and the largest army tile back in the box, as you won't need them for this game. Note that you'll still need the longest route tile though. Place the new resource cards representing paper, cloth, and coins near the game board alongside the other 5 resources, as well as the 3 new commodity types representing science, trade, and politics alongside those. The resources as normal are face up, and the others are all shuffled and face down. We'll then want to create a supply of victory point markers, the 3 different colored metropolises, the merchant piece, and the 2 standard dice alongside the new 3rd die to accompany them. For each player's personal supply, alongside taking the normal pieces, you'll also take all of the knights and city walls pieces included in the expansion. This also means that on top of the normal reference card, you'll have a cities and knights reference card that attaches on it from the side. Additionally, each player now receives a city improvement board to place in front of them, taking 3 cubes and placing them in each of the bottom spaces. You'll place the included barbarian ship on the first space of the barbarian track, and move the robber from where it was onto its small little space near the end of the barbarian track. Placing your starting pieces is very similar to normal CATAN rules, with one exception. Players will place their first piece as normal, with a settlement and a single road. However, when they go to place their second settlement and road, they instead place a city and a road. They'll still receive their starting cards as normal, however. Only 3, not 4 because of a city. A game of CATAN using the City and Knights expansion plays very similarly to normal CATAN with some exceptions. The first exception players will notice is with turn structure. There used to be only 2 phases to the game, but now the production phase has been split into 2 separate phases, being the roll dice phase and the production phase, with the action phase still following it. Let's start now with the now distinctly different roll dice phase. When a player rolls the dice on their turn, they now roll all 3 dice, and they resolve the event die before resolving production. If the event die ever shows this icon, then move the barbarian ship 1 space along the barbarian track. If the barbarian ship ever enters the last space of the barbarian track, then the barbarians attack CATAN, which I'll explain a bit later. If the event die instead shows one of the city improvement icons, we'll see if we draw a city progress cards due to our city improvement track. We will check the number on the red die rolled and compare it to where our cube is on that section of the city improvement track. For example, this die is checking the politics section, and the red die is showing a 5. Because our cube is in the bottommost section, it doesn't check for any dice, and we wouldn't do anything in this case. However, if later in the game our cube was in one of the 2 top sections, then we would draw a politics progress card. Progress cards are drawn from the top of the deck 1 at a time in turn order. They're added to our hand of progress cards, of which all 3 of the colors share, with a hand limit of 4. If we went over our hand limit of 4, we would have until the end of our turn to either play or discard down to 4. However, there is an exception. With this card, it is a victory point card, and victory point cards have to be played immediately into your play area, face up for everybody to see. This works very similarly to the victory point cards in the development deck in the base game of CATAN. I'll explain more about progress cards and when to play them a little bit later. After the roll dice phase is the production phase, where we count our roll on the red and yellow dice and compare it to the board to gain resources. Settlements gain resources identical to how it works in the base game. So, for example, if an 11 was rolled, this settlement would gain a single brick. However, using the City and Knights expansion, cities work a little bit differently. If a city is gaining resources due to the hills or fields terrain, then they gain their resources as normal, being 2 brick or 2 wheat respectively. However, if a city is collecting resources from a forest, instead of 2 wood, they'll gain a single wood and a single paper. Collecting resources from a pasture in a city instead means 1 wool and 1 cloth. And collecting resources using a city in a mountain means 1 ore and 1 coin. Rolling a 7 is slightly different using this expansion. Commodities, just like resources, are held in your hand, and you count over 7 in order to see if you have to discard. Building a city wall increases the number of cards you can hold in your hand, however, but we'll talk about city walls in just a minute. Moving the robber is also slightly different. The robber is stuck in its position on the Barbarian track until the first time the Barbarians attack CATAN. After the Barbarians attack for the first time, the robber is moved from its spot onto the normal desert as part of the game now. Anytime after this that a 7 is rolled, the robber acts as normal now. Moving into the action phase of the game, there is a slight difference with trade, as players can now trade resources or commodities freely amongst other players. Trade ports have also slightly been changed, as you can now trade resources for commodities when using this 3-to-1 port. You can also use this port to trade commodities for resources or for other commodities as well. However, you may never trade progress cards with other players or trade ports. Trade has also been enhanced because of the Merchant Progress card. Whenever a player plays the Merchant Progress card, they'll take control of the merchant piece, whether it was in front of another player's building or in the supply. They'll then place it on a land hex right next to one of their buildings. While you control the merchant, you can trade the resource represented by the current hex at a 2-to-1 rate. You cannot trade commodities because of this, only resources. So in this case, it would only be wood at a 2-to-1 rate. Control of the merchant piece is also worth a victory point. The action phase is also slightly changed because of the new build options. First of all, completely ignore the building of a development card. Those do not exist when playing the City and Knights expansion. You instead have city walls and knights that you can recruit, promote, and activate. Each one of these different buildings and/or actions have different building costs. Your reference card also shows the new turn structure as shown in the City and Knights expansion on the back of it. City walls are the first structure that can be built and are placed underneath existing cities, taking their spot, like so. City walls increase the number of cards you can keep when a 7 is rolled. Each city wall of your color on the game board increases that limit by 2. So if a 7 was rolled, I'd be able to keep 9 cards in my hand. The second new thing you can build is a knight. When building a knight, you place it like so, facing down on an intersection next to one of your roads. It does have to be an empty spot, but it does not have to follow the distance rule, which means that I could place it only one intersection away from one of mine or anybody else's buildings. Just like buildings, knights block settlement sites and block the routes of other players. The second action that can be done with knights are promotion, and that means replacing a knight piece on the board with the next highest level. As you can see, I just replaced a basic knight with a strong knight, with strength level 2 instead of 1. You can upgrade basic knights to strong knights natively, but you need to reach this level of the politics track in order to level up level 2 strong knights into level 3 mighty knights. The active or inactive status of a knight doesn't change when you promote it. So because I upgraded an inactive basic knight, the strong knight is also inactive. You also can only promote a knight once per turn. Of course, the next action you can do is paying to activate a knight, which means standing it up. You can do this in the same turn that a knight was recruited or promoted. Active knights can now perform knight actions, which we'll go through in just a moment. However, they cannot perform a knight action the turn that they're activated, so you have to wait until the next turn. Knight actions include moving a knight, displacing another knight, or chasing away the robber. You can only perform one of these 3 actions during your action phase for each knight. When you move a knight, you can move it any number of spaces down a continuous path of yours. For example, I could move it to this space or this space here, but I have to stop once the knight reaches that space, because after that, it's not connected to any of my buildings or roads. After you move a knight, you have to lay it down to show that it's inactive. The second action is displacing another player's knight. Let's say that I'm the blue player. If I move my knight into a space containing another knight, as long as it's a lower level than mine, that knight is displaced. The player that controls that knight has to move it along normal knight movement rules towards the end of its track. After you displace another player's knight, you have to lay down your knight to show it's inactive. After I move my knight to displace another player's knight, if that knight could not then move anywhere, it has to be removed from the board and put back in that player's supply. The third type of action is chasing away the robber using a knight. As long as an active knight is adjacent to the space with a robber on it, that player can use their knight action to activate the robber as normal, removing it from its spot and stealing cards from another player. After using this action to chase away the robber, mark your knight as inactive. Another new thing alongside the city walls and knights added to this game is the City Improvements board. You can make city improvements to give you access to progress cards in the 3 disciplines: science, trade, and politics, just like we talked about earlier. In order to make city improvements, you have to have at least 1 city on the board. This is going to be relevant when we talk about barbarians attacking in just a few minutes. As long as you have at least 1 city built, you can make any number of city improvements that you can pay for. To move up one of the 3 tracks and make a city improvement, you have to discard the commodities shown, buy the next space on the track, and move your cube up to that track. You can never skip over spaces. So let's say I wanted to upgrade the trade track by moving the cube to the next most space. I would have to pay 1 cloth in order to do that. Just like with any other payment, I would take that card and place it in the general supply. My ability to draw trade progress cards when the trade side of the event die is rolled has now increased. I can continue paying cloth throughout the game to upgrade and upgrade. And once I've reached the 3rd spot on this track, I gain a new permanent ability. For example, the trade says I can trade any 2 identical commodities for any 1 other commodity or resource. There are also icons on the topmost section here. These represent the metropolises. When you move your cube into the 2nd most top spot, you'll temporarily gain control of that track's metropolis. Now, if you're the first player to then move into the topmost spot, you'll permanently gain control of that track's metropolis. So let's talk about what these metropolises do now. Metropolises come in 3 different colors, representing science, politics, and trade. Because we gain control of the trade metropolis, we'll take that and connect it to one of our cities, like shown here. You can control multiple metropolises, but if you did, you'd have to connect them to different cities. Control of a metropolis is worth 2 victory points. So a city with a metropolis is a total of 4 victory points. Metropolises also prevent pillaging from the barbarians, which again we'll explain now. When the barbarian ship reaches the end of the barbarian track, the barbarians attack. First, we have to determine the barbarian's strength and the defender's strength. The barbarian strength is equal to the total number of cities, including ones with metropolises, currently on the board. However, the defender's strength is equal to the sum of the strength of all active knights on the board. You then determine whether the barbarians or defenders are stronger. In this case, the barbarians would win. The player or players that contributed the lowest total strength of active knights has one of their cities pillaged in this case. Pillaging a city means removing it from the game board and replacing it with a settlement. If a player has a city pillaged that has a city wall on it, they'll replace it with a settlement and also return the city wall to their supply. Cities with metropolises, however, cannot be pillaged and are safe from the attack of the barbarians. The strength of knights are equal to their level, so a basic knight would give 1 strength, a strong knight would give 2, and a mighty knight would give 3. If instead, the defenders are victorious, which means their strength is greater than or equal to the barbarian strength, then the player who contributed the highest total strength of the active knights receives a victory token from the supply and places it in their play area, representing an extra victory point. If the defenders win and multiple players are tied in strength, instead of gaining a victory point, they each receive a progress card of their choice. In any case, after the barbarians attack, take their ship and place it back in the starting position on the track. Progress cards can be played at any point during your turn, and you can play as many as you'd like in order to get below that 4 progress card hand limit. There is 2 exceptions, and I already talked about one, being the victory points that you have to play immediately. There is also an alchemy card. Pay attention to this one because it instead has the timing window of during the roll dice phase immediately before you roll dice. A game of Catan with the City and Knights expansion, instead of playing to 10 victory points, you play to 13. If on their turn a player has 13 victory points, they immediately win the game. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you to Asmodee for sending this copy over to the Cardboard Crash Course. If you want to catch up on the base rules of Catan, you can check it out in the video here, and the other expansion, Seafarers, in the video right here instead. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time on the Cardboard Crash Course.